We have a Friday panel for you as a weekend treat, and it's not just a thrown together Friday panel. It's not a run-of-the-mill job. It's John Greene, it's Dion Fanning, and it's Tommy Martin. I don't even need the titles anymore. I could nearly get away with using your first name, no surnames.
Yeah.
Tommy, thanks again for maintaining the balance of the universe, making sure there's always a virgin presenter here at all times.
It has to be done. Contractually obliged.
What are you going to say? There's always a very handsome man.
Yeah, he's got a good tan now, doesn't he? Yeah.
Right.
Dion, thank you for being what seems to be my crutch. I think every time I'm presenting, you're in.
Is that right?
The production team now even just say, "Do you want to get Dion in?"
I'm your comfort blanket.
Yeah. And John, a Friday panel doesn't happen without you, apparently. And
Is that right?
apparently they don't happen the last 7 months, but you're back in now, so welcome aboard.
Excellent.
John is looking at me because when we used to work together, this would be, it would be rare that you'd hear from me by 1 o'clock on a Friday when he was looking for copy. It would be,
A worrying sign.
it just wouldn't happen.
The coded phone call would be, "How are you getting on with that?" Which would be code for it. Where the F is it?
Yeah, and then I remember at my wedding, which was on a Saturday, the message from John and Fergie was just going through how they were delighted that they would be free of their regular Saturday, which was me calling, "Can you just change that?" Actually, and then 20 minutes later, I just had a look at one other thing. Just change that, please.
Yeah.
And so on till about 11 o'clock. So
God,
1 o'clock on a Friday. This is
Yeah.
it's amazing that you've converted into podcasting so well, isn't it? If you're pouring over every word like that.
oh yeah, sometimes you just gotta let it go.
Maturity.
Even
brings-
send it out into the universe and then worry about it again.
You've never done it. Joe, can we just do that again?
Well, we have.
We haven't even started recording, and twice you said, "Don't clip that." So it's always there. It's always there. We have a lot to get through, plenty happening, and we want to get into a few topics in detail. Isaac and the transfer sagas, the GAA met with a protest over their longest serving sponsor. We're going to flesh out the GAA manager issue as well that we spoke about on Bits and Bobs on Tuesday. And new age sports media, speaking of Dion, it's a brave new world which becomes more apparent by the week.
Well, it was obvious you had to get three young sort of thrusting
Influencers.
social media gurus in for that slot.
I'm not going to mention how handsome you are again. But, you could be an influencer.
Well, if considering most of the mediums I work on are 19th century.
Have you been asked yet to sort of stand in front of a mobile phone and wave, say, "Come into the studio," and then sprint into the studio and give people a tour?
It's coming, Conan.
If I get back in the Virgin, I tell you, I've got some plans for you.
Yeah.
We have a football show in your feed from yesterday. Miguel Delaney was on with Ronan, who's also cooking up an Irish club special after the European results last night. Shelbourne beat Linfield again. Anytime, any place, they're saying to them. This time the place is the Europa Conference League. Red card, 2 missed penalties, 4 goals at Tolka Park. Shelbourne take a 3-1 lead to Belfast. Linfield missed a penalty in the second half at 2-1. And then Evan Caffrey made 3-1 with 12 minutes to go. And Shamrock Rovers out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, away to the 5th best team in Portugal, as of last season anyway. They win 2-1 against Santa Clara. Danny Grant and Danny Mandreo with the goals. And that will be a cracker show with Ronan, who has Sean O'Connor, who is at Tolka Park, and Dan McDonnell dialing in from the Azores.
Best results in Irish football history in terms of pure coefficient versus countries was Portugal ranked 7th.
Derry nil,
Maybe.
Paris Saint-Germain nil. What about that? They threw that
A
out?
win.
Yeah,
I think
win's
a
a
win
win.
is. I think
Something in the Dundalk era, are they? Can't think.
Deportivo, Shelbourne, come back. Well, that was a draw as well,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah. It's up there.
I didn't hear one. No, I could be wrong. I didn't hear one person in the build-up tip them to win that game last night.
Yeah.
The general commentary seemed to be if they could keep it to 2-0 for the
Get
home
back to
leg,
Dublin, yeah.
and get them back to Tala. I didn't hear anyone saying they had a chance of winning that game.
Yeah.
I think the reading Dan McDonnell's report, the interesting thing about it wasn't just winning, but the manner of it, in that it was a sort of role reversal of typical Irish away European performances, and I think Rovers had most of the possession.
Yeah.
I think this Santa Clara team, that's how they played. They're a counter-attacking team.
Yeah.
And I think Rovers were well prepared for that. Now, they did go behind, but to have an Irish team with the maturity to go away in Europe know what to do, execute the game plan, come away. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's massive. Not to say Shelburne, obviously, if they finish the job, great as well. But they've come through the Champions route, which is set up. If Rovers pull this off and we get 2 teams in, then it is a huge milestone.
Oh my
Yeah, I was struck by that listening to Bradley afterwards as well. Like when he talked, and he was praising the players for it. Just that sense of this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to keep the ball away from them, but the courage to do that is on the players to actually go out and say, right, we're going to pass the ball, we're going to hold on to the ball because we know how dangerous they can be in transition, and if we lose it. So, but actually, as Tommy says, to actually do that for a League of Ireland team, it shows you the steps that are being taken, and they're slow, and there's knockbacks and there's frustrations, but there is progress being made.
We were talking about it upstairs in the office, and Sean O'Connor made the point, and this is something you forget or you overlook. He was pointing out some of those Rovers players have 40 games in Europe under their belt. I mean, that's the kind of experience that we're talking about that they have developed over the last 5-7 years.
Oh, it's mad. Like, and not to always...
Bradley has had 30-something games as manager.
Not to harp everything back to the
Or,
2006 Derry City run in Europe, obviously. You know, we're just talking about the PSG game, but that's a run that is remembered, you know, so well. It's 3 ties, really. You know, Gothenburg, Gretna, and Paris Saint-Germain, which was an unbelievable journey. But like when you compare it to Rovers, who are stacking up these games, Dundalk that you mentioned.
Well, I was saying to you this morning, I remember back in the day going to Liechtenstein. Back when you'd have a team like Langford Town would won the cup and they were in Liechtenstein it was just an excuse to go somewhere for a match and come home again, and that was your
jolly. And I people talk about think pieces about why the League of Ireland has enjoyed something of a resurgence or a degree of popularity in the last couple of years. Like, I don't think enough credit is given to the Michael O'Neill team that made the Europa League and the Stephen Kenny teams that made those Europa League group stages, for just like almost laying a sort of foundation of credibility for domestic Irish football, in the minds of those people who weren't traditional fans of the clubs. That sort of audience that would go rain, hail or shine. In those days, you looked at those achievements over the 2010s, and you kind of went, even if you weren't particularly, if you were a Premier League fan or a casual sports fan, you kind of went, that's actually immeasurable. That's something serious. And it's just those little milestones in terms of credibility that I don't think people focus on. People think, but it's about COVID and it's about Oasis shirts and craft beer at the games, and we're all looking for a sense of togetherness and all this. But then there's the actual football side of it.
They raised the level of expectation in Irish football about what should be the target and what the kind of the minimum targets of what these clubs should be after.
I think Europe is key in terms of, like, there is, as Tommy said, there is that resurgence and that Friday night kind of feel that has grown, especially among kind of the young demographic who go on a Friday night and they enjoy that thing. But to expand it even further, I think European football is essential, because it just you create, there's a different level of contest, there's a different level of competition than when to the outsider, when the League of Ireland clubs are playing each other. There isn't necessarily, unless you're a long-term League of Ireland fan, you might not have that investment in who, whether Bows beat Rovers or whatever. But when you're playing a European team, whatever European team it is, it actually captures that kind of floating fans' imagination. And you see that in viewing figures as well. Now, I will say that, like, Virgin's backing of the League of Ireland has been one of the great, I would say, counterintuitive success stories of kind of modern broadcasting, in sense of people will tell you, oh, this doesn't work. There aren't, and you do it and you commit to it.
You mean counterintuitive, that people thought it wouldn't be?
Yeah, people like, it's a bit like, go back to, it's a bit like long form podcasting or whatever. People saying, oh, nobody's interested in that stuff, but actually, the longer the better. I'm not, but I'm wondering, am I working into a trap here that's going to anger League of Ireland fans? But it's just like, the conventional wisdom was, this isn't something that is needed. And it's shown what happens with a bit of, and I'm not saying this, but like, we talk about public service broadcasting in this country a lot, and it always seems to be, and it's a hobby horse of mine, it always seems to be somehow that's something RTE does.
Yeah.
Whereas there's lots of people who do what you would consider public service broadcasting because it's something that is needed. And I would argue that RTE do, you see the way they've destroyed the panels on sports shows. I've talked about this before, but the way they've done that, that's the antithesis of public service broadcasting, in my view. But doing something like Virgin have done with the League of Ireland is working, but it's also in the interest of the public in the truest sense.
Yeah.
There's a real pet hate of mine is we cannot hear conversations about European football and the League of Ireland without money being mentioned. And it hasn't been intentional here because this wasn't a pre-planned discussion. It hasn't been mentioned once in the 5 or 6 minutes that we've been talking about it. It is so much.
I haven't planned for it.
It is, yeah. Well, it's about.
Next question. What about the money side?
It's about so much
Wrap up
more.
his running order again.
It's about so much more than the money that it's going to bring those clubs. And we've seen in the past the damage that money can actually do, and we still are waiting to be fully convinced that this level of money is a good thing for these clubs, that they can use it properly. Hopefully they will. Hopefully they won't end up like Dundalk and, go down that kind of that path. But it's really important that we have these conversations about European football and just leave the money thing to one side to look at what the other Dion's after covering it all there, all the real benefits, and then there's the money afterwards that we can see how they do with the money. Rovers seem to be doing okay so far with it, but I mean it's early days yet. These implosions tend to come a little bit later. So
it sounds like we're going to have a conversation about pathways.
It's interesting you say that because the League of Ireland's almost like a chimney in terms of Ireland. Well, obviously the international team is, but in relation to the people I'm speaking to here now, so I've got on the ground volunteers here. Like I've got salt of the earth people. I've got the chairman of Hockey United. I've got the coach of Marino Girls.
Yep.
Yeah. And
more prestigious.
Yeah, and John, obviously you're in the Gaelic football world, but you're also an under 15 coach. So I've got people who are, they're grassroots people, and you think of my hesitance, they bring up my first topic, which is Alexander Isak, and 110 million rejected, and talking about $250,000 a week wages, maybe not enough. Dion, that must make you sick.
That's a well, I'm going to confess now. I was on another podcast talking about Grassroots recently, and as we finished it, I said, I'm off now to go and buy my son a Liverpool shirt. So we all carry many elements within our own personalities and contradictions.
It's saying we can hold opposing views.
Yeah.
In the...
In Wilt Whitman's, do I contradict myself? Yeah. Very well then. I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. So I think...
That's been the dressing room at Dock United.
But this must be the sort of thing, John, you're obviously coming from the GAA world as well. Not that it's a competition. Dion would hate that because he coexists very well with Kula. But, is this a sort of story? Do you see this influence in children nowadays, like looking up to that sums of money and that lifestyle?
Yeah, you do. I do you know that programme that was on RTE over the last few weeks, Football Families? I haven't got to the third one yet, but the first two, I actually told, like every coach of an underage, I've got some wannabe Premier League footballers on my team. I'm sure you've got plenty on yours. I actually said to the parents, you should watch that show. It's really interesting just to see how hard it is to get into the Shelbourne first team.
Yeah.
Just see how hard it is to get into the Shelbourne first team. It's just the degrees of, the look and the talent, and then the little bit after that's required, even just to get to League of Ireland level now, is extraordinary. So when I look at stuff like Isaac, I have absolutely no interest in transfer sagas.
None. They all find this interesting.
No, I don't. What I find interesting was Jamie Carragher's piece today, where he's talking about that, like, Liverpool's season is effectively over if they don't come up with a plan B, if they don't get Isaac. And
I find transfers interesting because of what they seem to do to the kind of brain
Yeah.
and the effect they have on people. And I think Rory Smith has written a piece this week on Indy Kayla, who is the perfect example of that. Anyone who doesn't know Indy Kayla isn't on sport Twitter, really, football Twitter, but he is a fictional character who started making up by just stealing kind of transfer news from places. And gossip. But like the interesting thing about that is that actually it should be a fictional person, because transfers exist in an area where whether they're real or not doesn't really matter. It's what the idea of it does to the supporter. And a friend of mine, like,
Are you talking about? No, I'm talking about transfer sagas.
No, transfer sagas. No, transfer sagas. I know that, and I get that, and
the longer the better. We're going to thrash all this.
But no, the transfers themselves, the way they trigger that thing, and it's funny, and it doesn't have to be like Isak is obviously a high profile player and people are excited about it, but a friend of mine, when Liverpool signed that young Italian defender Giovanni Leone, I think his name is, last week. Now, good luck to people who'd heard of him. But a friend of mine put it best. He's saying, Liverpool really need to complete this signing of a guy I only heard of 3 days ago. You know what I mean? And you're all in.
Yeah.
Like, you're all in on this because this sounds right. Whatever this does to the dopamine for me is
Announce Leone.
Announce Leone. Give me Leone.
I actually think the dopamine's gone because the initial report, the Indy Kayla gossip, is the dopamine, and then what happens then in your head? You've already priced him in. You've priced in Isak.
But
it's different because it's all demoralising about he earns this amount of money and he's refusing.
Yeah, but that's
he's behaving like a spoilt child.
Yeah, but the point on that, which is kind of interesting now in terms of transfers, is Liverpool supporters are now beginning, and it's like Jamie Carragher, they're beginning to feel like, hold on, we haven't had this great transfer window. Hold on. We thought we were winning the transfer window. Now we're losing it. The important thing about that is that this bears no experience, has no impact on it. Liverpool signed nobody last year, and won the league.
Yeah,
they saw nobody, and you will see Liverpool supporters who are celebrating the summer, not because they won the league in late April, like with games to spare, but because they suddenly acted in this is how we want our club to behave. Finally, we're spending money after all those years.
It's the ultimate example of how the transfer market and the transfer game of the sagas, etc., and how they're covered is a separate entity from the actual football. Like the point Dion made there about Liverpool signed Chiesa as a sort of, and obviously he contributed very little to.
Played 100 minutes in
to the Premier League, and they won the league. Now that's not saying you don't have to manage your recruitment and manage your squad and rebuild your squad at times, as time goes on. But that's a separate thing from the big noisy garish transfer saga game that's played out across social media. And
it has no bearing on
in the fan sort of Twitter space world.
And also, if you look at all the most expensive signings, you could point and put them up for any fan and say, look, how many of these were actually successful?
Oh, the top 10 in the world is
Paul Pogba. how happy
Dembele
for Manchester
Barcelona.
United fans when Paul Pogba signed. Yeah. Like, I was listening to a very good Tottenham podcast last night, and they're just in despair about Eze, absolute despair, and saying he would have been the best signing since Jurgen Klinsmann. Yeah. It's like, he hasn't played for you. Yeah. You had Modric, you had Gareth Bale, you had all these people who were who didn't come that route. Does that not tell you something? Yeah. That the players that actually made a mark for Spurs, Son, and somebody did point out that they were trying to buy Berahino when they actually bought Son. So and I bet they were all in on Berahino. We need him. We must have announced Berahino.
Sack the board.
Yeah. So the correlation between the transfer and the success isn't real.
And if you want to underline that, the most successful clubs in transfer business now are the ones whose conduct in that world is almost unnoticeable, and they're your Brightons and your Bournemouths and your sort of Moneyball, data-driven clubs who sign these guys from, Japanese, version of the DDSL, and he comes and Matoma and players like that, who nobody's ever heard of, and suddenly Chelsea are buying them for 80 million. Literally 18 months later. That's the separate thing.
Even Man City seem to be able to quietly sign players. They had it all done
it's
before
just
they went to the
people
Club
accept
World
that now, like, now 200 million for City.
Well, how has it become the narrative that Liverpool even need a striker? I mean, I've seen them twice this season, and it looks to me like that. It's the other end of the pitch.
I think the people, the ITK people
in the know,
See, you wanted cutting edge people who knew what they were talking about here. We're thinking that the plan was Salah a year down the line might do actually I'm done here, or he'd drop off, and Isak would be one that would be part of the rebuild in 12 months' time.
Isak will sign for Liverpool next week.
And
you think so?
And now the opportunity is there to get Isak now. But the whole Isak thing is, I mean, a smarter man than me, Dion, could write a book about it in what it says about where just this moment in time and a lot of the issues, if people are into that sort of elite football world, because you have the Saudi element. And that's the Saudi element that when they came to Newcastle, it was, let's go. Yeah. We're going to be,
Mbappe. Chris Wood in.
Mbappe is going to be sweeping the stands, and Messi's going to be making the tea because we're going to be so big. We're going to take over the world. It was part of the first sort of thrust. I think when Saudi Arabia started trying to buy Newcastle, it was sort of even before their real surge into golf and everything else, because it took so long to get through. They've clearly got so many irons in the fire now and so many diversified interests that Newcastle's a little bit, we're not as keen on that anymore. And they've come up against this PSR world where they can't actually buy success. And so you've got this massive frustration. And yet Saudi Arabia, I perceive, I don't know for sure, I guess there's probably an element with the Isak thing that they don't want to lose face over what this is, which is a sort of a reaffirming of their actual place in the pecking order now, which is, there's only one apex predator, Real Madrid, in the football world. Everybody else is, to some degree, to be preyed on in this transfer world. And then, so there's that aspect. Newcastle haven't sort of accepted. What Newcastle should have done is take the massive money for Isak when it's on the, and buy the next Isak and keep developing themselves. Now they're in this ridiculous situation where they've got a guy who they seem to want to be saying they're going to leave rot, as the word goes. And then the other thing I find really interesting, apart from is he a spoiled child? Is he insulting the Newcastle miners of the 1980s by going on strike? Whereas is the this sheer tribal nature of where you stand on this, so you've got your Newcastle side, which is, yes, everything my club does and says on this, and everything Isak says on this is totally wrong. And the Liverpool side, like 3 months after the Trent Alexander-Arnold debacle, where the whole idea of freedom of movement and a man navigating his career how he would like to was anathema. Now they're all about Isak and his individual rights.
Free Isak.
You
have like Carragher today, like as you say, almost demented. And what are Liverpool going to do if they don't sign? In the Sunday World, John Aldridge on Sundays, like Isak, has to sign for Liverpool. And if this was, I was thinking, reading these two pieces, if this was the other way around. If this was Mo Salah, I mean, this is outrageous. After everything Liverpool have done for Mo Salah, it's so tribal. But it's just, Dion's right, he will be a Liverpool player next week. It's inevitable now, isn't it?
Well, I think it's interesting. Like
the narrative of how these things play out.
Well, yeah, I think Tommy's point about the ownership is interesting. It's the only element, I think. Looking at what Eddie Howe has said even today, it's like, Howe clearly thinks we need to sell him. And I would say, not because players, like, one of the extraordinary things about this as well is how quickly everybody forgets, including me.
Including the Newcastle fans still there in a week and a half.
Yeah, but everybody forgets, because you forget how often these things have happened.
Gerrard, Suarez, Rooney.
Whatever, and it changes and it moves and everyone moves on really quickly. And I remember when Trent Alexander-Arnold was being booed, people were saying, this might affect how people feel about signing for Liverpool. Because, you know, they might not think of, well, if I want to leave, I'm going to be booed. And then, you know, they were winning the early part of the transfer window before they blew it.
Manchester United being shite last season didn't affect anybody wanting to sign for them this summer.
Yeah, but also that was completely forgotten in terms of the fan expectation at the start of the season. Manchester United are back because they had a great pre-season and Amateurism was looking refreshed. But the thing about, like, I think one thing that has damaged Newcastle is this sense, like, they taking the money for Isak would actually have been a strong move. Saying we know what to do with this money once we get it.
We're in charge of
this. Yeah, we're in charge. Not like, oh, we must sign a replacement. We can't let this guy go. He's gone on strike. This is desperation. There's no one. We can't find any striker. That kind of neediness is actually the thing that I think is damaging. They would have been much better off just saying, right, we'll negotiate with her. We'll get as much money as we can. Now, I still think that will happen. But they've done it in a way that kind of suggests who's running this club, who's in charge. Because the one thing that players don't care about any of this stuff. They don't care about any of this noise, but they actually do care a little bit about how are you going to, you know, okay, they probably care about money, but they also care about how are you going to play me? Who are you going to play me with? What are your plans? What are you thinking? And this kind of chaos suggests, like, well, we haven't really thought of it. Like, you're reading now, like, this is going to be a reset for the ownership at Newcastle. This moment, like, this incompetence has led us to see that we now must just reassert our devotion to Newcastle.
Well, money is also very relevant in the GAA world as well. Speak your language now, John. Both Connor McKeown and Colin Keyes have been writing about this GAA protest story, and Colin O'Rourke has a piece coming on Sunday too. So on Wednesday, a letter was handed in to Croke Park with reportedly around 800 signatures of football, hurling, camogie players. This is present and past intercounty players. They want the GAA to end its partnerships with Allianz because of a report from the UN which found that a subsidiary of Allianz was one of a number of companies that was purchasing Israeli treasury bonds, which the report said had a role in funding the ongoing assault in Gaza. Allianz has been partnered with the GAA for over 30 years, probably best known for its sponsorship of the National Leagues, but it's also the sponsor of the Camogie Association and Common the Munskill as well. Dion, concerns have obviously been mentioned previously by players and representative bodies, you know, around this area, but this is about as explicit as it has been, I think, that they're actually asking for action.
Yeah, and you can completely understand why people want action at this stage. Like, you know, what we're witnessing and what we're watching and what people are feeling helpless about is so horrific, absolutely horrific. And, you know, my starting point on some of these things is often, well, like, you know, what is the skin in the game for people in terms of boycotts or, you know, all this kind of stuff? Because, you know, this is a company, and like, look, their statement says this is a, you know, they talk about Allianz in Ireland being separate to, you know, the global company, and this is a subsidiary, and like in the interlinked world of modern business, these, you know, it's not hard to find links to things. Like, it's not like the world we live in today isn't like, you know, a boycott in South Africa in the 80s when, you know, you didn't take fruit, you didn't take, like, it's things are more complex than that. And so there's always a part of me that is kind of like, well, you know, if you're going to protest, what is it costing you? Not what is it costing, if you're going to demand a boycott, what is it costing you? Not what you're asking somebody else to, if you're asking somebody else to bear the brunt of the cost. So, like, I have that element of a response in theory. But when you're actually dealing with this, I understand why so many people are saying, whatever it takes, whatever, because, you know, you see the way the Occupied Territories Bill is being opposed and briefed against and being talked about in America, which is, you know, an Occupied Territories Bill. It is not a boycott. It's not an Israeli boycott. It is specific to occupied territories. And again, there does come a time when you have to say, well, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do? And again, it comes back to, like, a sporting boycott of Israel at this stage. It's extraordinary that it isn't even considered. So I can understand. I completely understand why this is what people are saying, and like it's complicated to the extent that this is a company that has it has Irish roots, has an Irish presence, has had a long association and partnership with the GAA. So I can understand, and has also provided a lot of money to the GAA. So I do feel that I can see why you would be going, okay, like why this? But right now, it's very hard for people not to say because it's nothing is changing. Things are getting worse, and so as things get worse, it's understandable that if people just consider options that they may not have looked at before.
Colin O'Rourke is definitely coming out strong in this Sunday Independent. This coming Sunday said, Allianz are not alone in nakedly profiting from the destruction of a race of people, but the other companies listed by the UN are not direct GAA sponsors. So this is why I got involved. So he's one of the 800 people. As a community, the GAA prides itself on a sort of moral code. It's not perfect in any way, yet it has standards of decency, honesty and respect. And it may take time to break from Allianz due to contractual issues, but they should not be sponsoring next year's league. John, I mean, like, this is part of the... It seemed depressing they boiled it down to that, but that's probably part of the quandary that the GAA might think about this, is that we lose a lot of money here, and then what happens if we open the gate for other sponsors?
Where do you draw the line? Look, I'm really confused on it. Like... The people involved, and we know, like David Hickey, the former Dublin footballer, is one of the organisers of this protest, and he's been, he's a very admirable man for lots of reasons, for things he's done all his life, but like he's been, as far as I'm aware, he's been regularly protesting outside the Israeli embassy since this war started, in trying to highlight the plight of Palestinians. But like, it's where you draw the line. It's like, there's different elements to sponsorship, but in essence, sponsorship has always been about sports washing, almost before sports washing became a thing. You give money, generally speaking, because there's elements of where there's philanthropic part to it, but there's also you're conscious of your image and you're conscious of your brand. And we had sport was always the first home for alcohol sponsorship, cigarette sponsorship, gambling companies. This is where and now we see sports washing of a whole different kind with state-sponsored sports washing. You ask people about Allianz and in Ireland, and I suspect they wouldn't know a whole lot about Allianz as a company, except they'd probably feel quite well disposed towards them, because anything that their name has ever been attached to has kind of had a warm, fuzzy feeling around it, and its association with the GAA in particular has been a very mutually beneficial relationship in terms of reputation and finances. But so where do you draw the line? I mean, as Conor McKeown points out in his piece in the Irish Independent today, the banks that, the misery that banks brought to this country, and they have used rugby and GAA in particular as part of their rehabilitation in the Irish consciousness. There's question marks around some clothing companies. I mentioned gambling. So it's a company like Allianz is so vast that we all we know is this kind of little small Irish element to it. But these vast companies, the reality is we really don't know where that money swishes around, what it does, where it goes.
Yeah,
I just find I find it a really hard thing to separate out. Just to finish the point, where sport can really make a difference now is I can't get my head around the different treatment of, say, Russia and Israel, where, as soon as Russia went into Ukraine, it was like, bang, they were out of the Olympics, they were out of football. And yet we have this kind of different approach to how Israel is viewed. I felt really sorry for the Irish basketball team. I felt they were put in an awful position. It's very unfair to ask one small group of people or organisations to make a decision. A collective international decision around sport and Israel needs to be made.
Well, yeah, I agree with that to a point. I do think in all these things, it's maybe, again, we're reaching that stage where you actually say, well, somebody has to, because the reason Russia got boycotted so quickly was because teams were refusing to play them.
Yeah. But that hasn't happened.
No,
yet.
I know, but if until somebody does it.
There was enough of an international consensus with Russia that UEFA and FIFA and those organisations felt they had covered to make those decisions.
Power is.
But I think this
the 800 people. It's absolutely an honest and well-meaning and genuine attempt by them to highlight this and to make a point that they feel needs to be made. I just feel it's an awkward one for the GAA to try to deal with, because where's the line the next time? They're the only sporting organisation that don't take alcohol sponsorship. Even at local level, you can't have your local pub sponsoring a local team.
To touch on, to come back on that point about people wanting to do something, why this, apart from the obvious horror of it, is so important in our modern world is that people are just absolutely bereft at the fact that it is being allowed to happen. In a world where a couple of years ago there seemed to be a moral coalition in the Russia-Ukraine situation. Now that's obviously with the man in the White House, that's fracturing at the moment. People can't understand why there's who's doing something about this. I dragged my family to the Normandy beaches at Easter, which was very obviously appreciated. Where's the roller coaster here? But the thing that struck me about that, and it is obviously it's like a theme park for sort of history enthusiasts or people who the stories of that time, and the story of that time, especially if you go to sort of the American beaches, is of heroism, is of moral authority, where the Allies saved the world, how men largely, and it was obviously women in the medical services as well, and behind the scenes, sacrificed their lives, gave everything in the cause of righteousness and freedom. And it was a story that people we told ourselves for the rest of the 20th century and up to this current point. Now we're at a point where is the moral authority? Like, it really struck me that time that America was the hero. And like every movie you watched in the 80s with, Sylvester Stallone or Schwarzenegger in it, where they were always the world's policeman. And now they were essentially, they and other Western nations were facilitating this horror to happen. So that, again, feeds into people find this need of, we have to do something. And then you have the example of the sport against the name of the organisation, campaigning at the moment against the GAA sponsorship by Allianz. So like that again, to come back to your point about the complex nature of it, but from getting back to purely the GAA's point of view, like every single debate that we have about the GAA comes down to one thing: is what kind of organisation is it? Or what kind of organisation does it want to be in the modern world? So Conor McKeown's article is really good because the question is, where is the line for an organisation like the GAA, where they have obviously taken a stand against alcohol and gambling? But Conor makes the point, what about the banks that ruin the nation? What about the fast food companies? And what about this example as well? Every debate in the GAA, you talk about free-to-air matches, you talk about the use of Croke Park for concerts. It always comes back to that sort of thing: is where is their sort of moral? I don't envy them having to make that sort of calibration and that sort of decision.
And just the thing about sport is it is internationally recognised that the ability to take part in sport is a basic human right, and that's been denied in Palestine, and therefore there is this helplessness. You're right, but like the international sporting community, if it were unified, is a powerful thing. And I just don't understand why the international sporting community is standing by and allowing things to happen.
Because they don't have the cover of the political community. I think that's what it is. They are. You see the man who's the head of FIFA, and he's basically he's a toady for whoever.
Let's say the European
the
Union
political...
has the European sport has got a certain amount of political backing. You know,
No, not much.
international
Not
sports.
from. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's got
Negligible.
much. And again, like, and that. Yeah, and I think that's true. But I also do feel that, like, if even if there was a sporting boycott, that would, in some ways, you know, the GA might be saying, great, well, we don't have an international sport dimension of any significant degree, so we can sit out that boycott, and we don't need to engage. We don't need to engage in this matter at all, then, because the international sporting community is doing something. So, but, like, this is the thing, and if you want to make, you know, if this was
I'm not
if this was a
do nothing, I said
if this was a Russian
Tommy,
company,
I don't envy.
No, I don't envy them either, and I understand.
I don't know what the
and
answer is.
It's like it's a bit like, look, it's not the equivalent, and any equivalence in this is not right because of what's happening. But, you know, when Micheál Martin is going to the White House to see Donald Trump, and we know the amount of jobs that are at stake in Ireland because of foreign direct investment, and we're like, do you go in and, like, you know, kind of Gary Cooper it, or do you actually kind of laugh at his jokes, because of all the people's jobs and the livelihoods that depend on American investment? Now, the GA, and this is like, there's doing the right thing at a certain point becomes the key thing, and I think we're at that point. But the GA might say, well, you know, we've certain responsibilities. We need to meet. We've got people with jobs. We've got all that kind of stuff. But again, because of, as Tommy says, what they're perceived to be, which is a great, which is, in essence, even though there are contradictions in it, and there's a revenue element, and there's all those things, it's an incredible thing. Like, I'm saying that,
thing,
and I remember going to GA Congress one year, and being struck by, like, being very bored mainly, but being struck by that sense of, I think it was the year they introduced a ban on gambling.
And it was my father proposed that motion.
Well, there you go. Yeah, and, like, being struck by the engagement with what's happening in the country. You know what I mean? Because you have all these people from everywhere in the country standing up and talking about what's happening, and people, you know, and people from Yorkshire and all these, you know, like Hertfordshire delegations, all that kind of stuff. And it was an extraordinary thing to see, because this is where people are doing stuff because they believe.
Beyond, there was personal testimonies from people who were in the GA who had been personally affected.
Yeah, but
it became this.
Yeah, but
you know, I'd imagine that discussion is happening in the GA. That where is the line discussion? Because I'm sure there's people who run the finance side saying, do we need to look under the bonnet of every sponsor that comes into this place? When the Russia thing happened, there was a firm line. Assets were frozen, sanctions were issued, boycotts were issued at the very highest level. The political cover was there for everybody knew where everybody stood. And in this situation, people are just floating bereft. You know, you're not.
There's a global paralysis around.
Well, I think it's worse than paralysis. I think and I think that's why, and that's what I said at the beginning. I think that increasing sense of helplessness as things kind of unbelievably get worse is going to lead to people to say, well, we have to, you know, we understand that this is awkward for you and this is difficult and this is problematic and there's the costs involved and all that, but somebody has to do so. And this is why, you know, this idea, and I read an article this week about talking about the finger wagging of Ireland in terms of kind of global affairs and how, and you will see learned people, you know, oh, this is symbolic, but actually it's very damaging at the same time. Just whatever you do, don't do it, even though it's only symbolic, but it's also hugely damaging, but just don't do it, okay? And it's like, why? Like, something has to be done. And this goes back, unfortunately, to things like Basketball Ireland and saying, right, somebody has to, like, and maybe it shouldn't have to be us, but it's kind of that despair. I met Fintan Drury yesterday, who's written this book about Gaza, and he's just talking about the response he's got to his book, and which was very bravely, you know, which a publisher took on and bravely published. But again, just that sense of kind of ongoing helplessness that people feel. And the worst, and we've all sat there, we're going, oh, this is a turning point now. This is the turning point. This is, the international community is now they're going to do something. And then that next phase gets normalized too, and we move on to the next stage. So
do we take a state approach to it? We Googled another company this morning that's a huge sponsor in Irish sport, and there's similar issues with this company. So do we take a national approach to it and say, okay, if you're involved in funding this war, there's no room for you here in our sports? Is that what we? I don't know.
No, and I think that's the question you're asking at the very start as well, Dion. It's like, what questions action raises. Like if you say, right,
it's ultimately go back to your original point. It's up to the GAA to sit down and make that decision, like they did when your father made that proposal, because they are in a position to say, what are we about? Yes, this money comes in and it manifests itself in coaches employed around the country, floodlights and dressing rooms and AstroTurf pitches and all that sort of thing. But at what price? That sort of thing. In that particular case, it's up to them as an organisation.
And I am sceptical ultimately of this idea that we are some kind of outlier. This idea that Ireland is finger wagging and is a disgrace and sanctimonious and all that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not big on finger wagging, and I'm not fond of people wagging their fingers, but I don't believe that. You talk to people, you look at the UK. The government has done one thing, but you look at the UK. There's 45% of people in the UK think that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. My brother is back from Berlin. He's talking about the protests that he's been going on there, that he's been seeing there, and now they're being dealt with in a way by the police, which in a way wouldn't happen here. But there is mass outrage everywhere. So this attempt to say that we're some kind of student union, immature, kind of juvenile society that doesn't really understand. You don't really understand how the world works, lads, do you, out there on the kind of in the Atlantic? It doesn't tally with the reality of how people feel about this. So the point I'm saying about that is, I don't believe that we would necessarily be isolated if we did this, in terms of other people doing similar things.
No, and we haven't been isolated in terms of some of the actions that we've taken. Like other European countries have joined us, and there's Spain and others.
Yeah, well, this specific question is being asked of the GAA, but it's on the backdrop of, I suppose, a change in face of the GAA in general. So I think that Congress you went to, Dion, I think everybody remembers it. Was it 2017 maybe?
2017, yeah.
Like it does feel like such a remove from that, like eight years on, how the GAA is just caught up with professionalism, I'd almost say, and just how far down that rabbit hole we've gone now. So Michael Verney had a piece that struck a chord with me anyway. It was about county managers and how many jobs are now vacant. So in football, there's 12 managers that have left their post this year. Two of them, Dermot McCabe and Jerry Brennan, went back to their home counties, so that's probably understandable. But it's the fifth year in a row where the number of managers leaving a county job is in double figures. And we know why that is, because it's the demands of the job. And we started to find that acceptable now, that you'd nearly have to be retired to do this job properly. And for me, that's where the GAA's gotten to. I remember speaking to Jarlath Burns in 2020 when he first went for the Uachtaráin, and he was his mission at that time was talking about the overtraining. I think the stat that he had was players were overtraining by 40%, and he was using the example of players that are in college that were travelling back down to train with their county team, and that just keeps going now. That's players, then the coaches, and I mean coaches because they're separate to the managers, and this is club level as well. And it's not just coaches, managers being paid, it's everything else that goes along with it. It's all support staff, conditioning, analysis, physios, and it just feels like in the space of those 5 years when I spoke to Jarlath Burns, the GAA is almost a completely different thing now. And the county manager's job being vacant is the tip of the iceberg.
I'm glad you're addressing the GAA questions to me. I'll take this.
I did want to say there was a great Michael's piece was excellent. There was a really good piece in the Sunday Times at the weekend. I think it was Christy O'Connor with Stephen Rochford, Peter Queally, a couple of other people, and Liam Sheedy was quoted as well. And it was really interesting the scale of the job involved and the degree and what's actually involved. what makes up those hours and what you need to do. And I just thought there was a few interesting points in it. I remember, I think it was with you guys, Jim Gavin, when he was in explaining the FRC stuff. I think Joe asked him about the pay for play stuff, and that clip popped up recently.
He said he could never stand in front of a Dublin team knowing he's being paid.
But there was a quote in this article that said, despite the increasingly professional demands on players, they don't seem to have an issue around payments to managers either. An insight report conducted by the GPA last year found that 92% of hurlers and footballers favoured managers being paid. So, I don't know, I mean, look, not saying that, I mean, that's a personal feeling that Jim Gavin obviously would have had some, I mean, I'm not sure it's the the sort of red line.
But I think that's part of the problem, because players think that they're getting best in class if you're paying them. And that's the attitude then in the GAA.
That's what I was going to say. I think it's a kind of almost unintended consequence of that, in that everybody feels, you put money on the table and everybody feels they have to justify their own existence. Let's have you out on Christmas morning at 6 a.m. Because I can't be sitting around here doing nothing. And what
are we paying this for?
And like Jim, it's interesting you bring up Jim Gavin, because I'm friendly with Paul Flynn, and Paul will say that there are, like, he remembers when they were, when now Dublin had reached a point at this stage, but they'd be hearing like like Mayo or whoever, they're out, they're doing 20k runs on Christmas Day. He's like, we were at home having Christmas dinner. We like. The sense of actually doing things at the right time when it counted was what they were all about. And that's the professional way of doing it. I did a piece with Zach Toohey for the Independent. And Zach Toohey was saying, like, the difference between him and a GAA player isn't the amount of training, it's the amount of rest. Because the rest isn't factored in to a GAA player's life because they're working and then they go and train. And it's because... it's like Damien Duff. Like, Damien Duff was famous for sleeping. It wasn't, but it was actually part of a kind of being a correct approach.
Michael Essien sleep 16 hours a day. Is that a myth?
They have to do, like, that's the thing you have to do if you're going to make those demands. But the GAA is kind of like, let's go all in here, and it's because if you create this culture, and it's not just counties, it's clubs or managers. You create this culture of, here's somebody doing something. And if he then says, if somebody's paying him whatever they're paying him, and he says, "That lads are grand, let them, we'll see them in February or something," everyone will be like, "What are we paying him for?"
I think as well, there's another quote I'm just going to read from the piece for Liam Sheedy. Says, "It's really important we live our amateur ethos. But it's borderline impossible to manage an inter-county team if you're holding down a full-time job. So there might be something there for GAA to discuss where managers do have some form of assistance during the championship." Now, there's a kind of a construction that sort of illustrates where this whole issue lies, which is, I played the GAA all my life, followed the GAA, I love so much about it, but there is a little bit of old Ireland, let us not speak of it, hidden things element that still survives there, which is, we all know that there are managers getting, suitcases full of cash or whatever, sums of money handed to them. Okay, not all. Some are doing it for love of county and club, etc., etc. But some are. We don't talk about it, but we do talk about it. We don't say it, but we do say it. We champion the amateur ethos on All Ireland Sunday when there's 82,000 people in Croke Park and say, this is what we are, this is what we're about. These lads aren't getting paid, and yet professionalism is a real living thing within the GAA. So I think, to be fair to Jarlath Burns, he obviously wants to have he's trying to have a real conversation about it. But until you get to a point where you sort of say, let's not pretend that, like, either we're in on the amateur ethos thing or we're out. And it feels like we're talking about the reality is that money is changing hands. Yeah. So do you just hold your hands up and say, let's just live with that reality in some way?
Yeah.
Like maybe a cleverer way than handing over a bunch of cash. Maybe it's some other wording or tax breaks or whatever. But
that Liam Sheedy quote basically translates as an Irish solution to an Irish problem.
Yeah.
And we always talk about this in the realm of distance of some kind. The people who are paying managers are so-called GAA people, who are full of the ethos of the GAA, and the managers themselves are GAA people who are full of the ethos of the GAA. And yet, and as you point out, there's this old Irish thing of there's this other thing going on that we dare not speak of. If we're getting to a point, and we were talking about this earlier, even at club level, if you're involved in a club team, and it's your local club team, and you're the assistant manager, and they've brought in an outside manager, or you're a selector, we were talking about this earlier, and the manager's an outside manager, and you know that manager is getting paid, and you're going out on a piss and wet December night for training, that you'd rather be at home with your family or going for a pint with your friends or something. But no, I'm signed up to this thing, and I have to go down to the club and help this guy who's getting paid to be there to do what I'm doing with him. And there's all these things that we're putting away and we're not addressing, and until we address them, we're going to have this counterculture or subculture in the GAA that's rotting it from the inside out. And eventually one of two things will happen. Professionalism we will go right to the brink of professionalism. We're not far from it now, but we will get very close to it. Or we decide, hold on a second, this actually is not what we're about. And we can't just keep saying this is not what we're about. We have to do something about it. And the people themselves have to take responsibility for their actions and their hypocrisies. And start a club manager can. So you start at the clubs, because that's where the inter-county thing is. Start at the club. A club manager cannot be paid unless the club agrees to pay him. Can't. There's no benefactors coming in. So you start there and you be honest with yourself and you say, no, we're not going. Now, if somebody is driving X amount of miles to come and do a training session or whatever, I personally have no problem with them getting their petrol money and their dinner or whatever. That's always been the way. If you were a committee man in the GA and you went to Croke Park for a meeting, you got your dinner and you got your mileage. That's all fine. But it's the other stuff that's going on that's... So if we get to that tipping point, if we go past it, it's gone. If we pull back from it, nobody is forcing you to be an inter-county manager or a club manager or a... So you're doing it for one of two reasons. You're doing it for the money, which I think there's an element of. I think there's an element of people on the club merry-go-round and the inter-county merry-go-round who just have got used to that money and can't do without it. Or you're doing it for the love of the job.
Yeah.
But there's an awful lot of complaining about sacrifices and the amount of time that we have to put into this. Why do you... It goes back to the thing, I have to put this amount of time in because I'm getting paid, so I have to be seen to be doing, and it just becomes this circle
but the club
circle of life.
Is a problem in that as well, because they feel like they have to do something. You're saying nobody's forcing you to be a manager, but the club feel like they're being forced to pay for somebody. They feel like eyes are on them to get the right guy, to keep up with, especially imagine you're in the Dublin Senior Championship and you see what Kilmacud Crooks are doing. We need to do that as well. We need the same level of backroom team around us, and then the players are seeing this, and the players are at college and they're at county, and they're coming back and saying we need this, 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 and this. This guy's not going to cut it. Well, then and then the club are worried. The club are worried those players will leave, and they want to keep them happy. And they're constantly worried about all their sports. So the game is going, but I think urgent.
Sorry, Dion. I've been a club secretary at a very small club, and I've been involved in county board at men's and women's level. If you're a club secretary, even I haven't been a club secretary for about 7 or 8 years, there was a lot of work involved in it. I believe now it's many multiples of what I was doing. If you're a club chairperson, we have Julie is our club chairwoman, and the amount of work that falls on her lap every day is extraordinary. Are you a club chairperson?
Never stops banging on about it.
So you can give personal testimony to this. There's it's everybody who's involved in making a sport good is putting in an awful lot more of themselves than they may actually have time for, and are making sacrifices.
And that's what we're losing. So I was worried of sounding, sentimental on bits and bobs and Tuesday when we talked about this.
There's nothing wrong with being sentimental.
But I think we need to preserve that in the GAA, because that was the magic that we had, and it's so far gone. And I think drastic action. Your question's right, Tommy, about should we just allow this to happen? But for me, that's almost equivalent to me asking athletics. Should we just let everybody take drugs and make sure it's a level playing field? But something has to happen there to stop it happening right now.
One thing I'm struck by, as an outsider, or as I say now, it's a GAA adjacent person on a podcast, is that the club. When I hear people talking about the club and the GAA, it is everything's about the club. Back to the club. We changed the All Ireland dates for the club. All this kind of stuff, and yet the club seems to be many, many things. It isn't one thing. If you're talking about clubs, managers getting paid at club level, and what that creates, and we're going to lose players, and yet the essence of, to me as a observer, is
the
that
GAA
adjacent, but is and who has to resist this idea constantly peddled by my co-presenter that there's the only people doing it for the love of sport are people in the GAA. As you laid out, lots of people are doing that. But this, the club as an observer, then to me is actually the people showing up and volunteering all through the club, and in some ways, the senior team or whatever it is it contradicts that, goes against the volunteering element of the club, and then this thing that actually has been prioritised in the GAA by the act of cultural vandalism of moving the All Irelands from September is actually something that it goes counter to the key ethos of amateurism. Right, yeah. And this thing has been, so the club isn't this thing. I'm just amazed listening to this that somehow it's let's get the club player, let's not forget about the club player. And yet the club player and the senior club part of every club is creating this, is helping accelerate this drive towards professionalism, when it's the other element of the club, and I'm saying this as an observer, it's the other element of the club, the people who go out and train the underage teams, the kids who go down, all that volunteering that goes on, which is really, to go sentimental, which is really the true heart of it.
Which happens in every sport.
Which happens in every sport, but I will give this, it is handed on, and I see this in the local GAA club, Coola. I see this. It is handed on as an heirloom in the GAA. You know what I mean?
Yeah, don't fuck this up.
But you volunteer, and you've people who coming in, and where I live, people who have no knowledge of the GAA. I've never spent any South Dublin people who wouldn't have it, but they grasp, or they're told about this code of volunteering, and they put themselves forward because that's what the GAA is about. And that is as anyone who volunteers knows, to actually have people putting themselves forward to volunteer isn't half the battle, it's nearly all the battle. Mm-hmm. And to have that and to put that under threat, because you're actually saying, well, no, there's an element of these clubs where you're actually you're quasi-professional, or whatever way you want to put it. Seems to me it's just a contradiction that strikes me. A part, almost a companion piece to the thing you've talked about the things that are hidden.
Yeah.
No, it's part of it.
Yeah, I think it's part of it. It's part of the discussion before about what the GAA wants to be. And I wonder how much the precious amateur ethos thing that, we all remember the guys who used to train the kids' teams, who the stalwarts and the volunteers from where we were growing up, how much that is compatible. How much is the changing nature of Ireland contributing to this? For example, when we were growing up, there wasn't that much money sloshing around Ireland to pay anybody. Never mind S&C, somebody with a laptop. I mean,
we're no laptops.
With a Commodore 64 running the stats for.
I grew up in a house where the Longford senior football jerseys and under 21 and minor and whatever were washed on a Sunday night. Yeah, and were hanging on the line on a Monday.
So there's that thing as well, and then there's the other thing of the Ireland that we live in now. People have less time. People are much more, modern sort of alienation, their own little family units, and they don't necessarily that sense of volunteerism isn't everything. And I would have perceived this. I was having a chat with, as well as the soccer, I also mentor my son's under 14
Wow.
team, and I went and there was a bit of a discussion of geez lads, how do we get out of this now? Because we're at the age now, these lads have been looking at us since they were 4 or 5.
Have you ever considered running for president?
Yeah. There'll be no skeletons.
Not paid.
It's expensive. Mileage
and dinner.
And you get a house.
Because we're but what would have happened in days gone by, and is that people would manage teams in the club, and it wouldn't necessarily be parents. But now there's a bit of it's like, well, why would I do that? I think everybody's sense, a lot of the time, what's weakening that sense of volunteerism is the transactional nature of everybody's life. Everybody's like, why would I do that? Well, my son's not there, or that's got nothing to do with me. And so, going back to your point about that precious thing, that if we do, the more that it becomes obvious that this is happening, the weaker that sense of, here's this magical thing that we all, and I think it is weakening. I can feel it weakening in getting people to take these roles on club committees, and getting people to go and train somebody who isn't, necessarily your own kid's team. And
it's always been hard. It's harder now, but it has always been hard to get people to volunteer. It's just always been, if you've been involved in a club for any length of time, every year, who are we going to get to do treasurer? Who's going to take the under-13s? I got a text today saying about next year's under-13s, who's going to take them. And it's always, very few people come forward and put their hand up and say, do you know what, I'd love to be part of the Tidy Towns committee in the village, or I'd love to be the chairman of the local soccer club. There's always been a kind of a, looking at the census, at the names on the
wrong place, the wrong time.
Whose house can I call to? Whose door am I going to knock on now to beg to do this job?
But it is immensely rewarding as well as head wrecking.
Yeah,
in that sense. So I think
explain that to me.
Yeah, I sent a text to somebody.
Don't you get the brown envelopes?
About the stressful summer of coaching. Trying to get a team out.
Yeah,
you're. Imagine, trying to get 11 out, you're trying to get a team of 15 out in a summer competition has been a nightmare this year. It's a head wrecker, but a lot of people do it because it's what they saw themselves, and there's still a lot of goodwill in people in areas. But I just think that as big a threat as anything is if this creeping professionalism, well, it's probably no longer creeping, it's probably very much here and now. But I hate this notion. I absolutely detest this notion of sacrifice. That I am going to manage this county team, and then we start talking about the sacrifice that he or she makes. You go in with your eyes open. Nobody taking over a team at any level in any sport, a club is under any illusion as to the amount of work involved, and that's why they bring so many people into it.
I think there is sacrifice. Some people do stuff though when they
but it's a sacrifice that you are willing to make by accepting it.
Yeah,
and
I would say
making a virtue of it then is. I just don't like it.
I would say on volunteering, I still think I would be a bit more I'd be a bit more hopeful in terms of I'm still amazed, in a good way. You go down to our club and when they're training, especially this time of year when it's summer evenings and you get to see everybody, you're not scurrying in and out, but the amount of people who are giving their time and are actually down there doing stuff. It's a kind of extraordinary. People who've been coaching teams from the age of 5 and go all the way through.
But I wonder, going back to John's point about that separation, or that. Your point about the senior team being is it almost a distinct world? I think what will happen, it's almost like that sort of people will sort of realise this is actually what it's all about, and you might get a sort of almost a kind of a schism between we don't want that world.
I would say, Tommy, that in a lot of GAA clubs, and I'll speak from my experience, but it's probably true of other sports as well, where the adult team in the club almost sees itself as separate from the rest of the club, as much as the other way around, that they see themselves as this separate entity that needs to be treated differently and thought of differently, and needs training tops and tracksuits.
I think, but you see the tone that you're bringing there, and there's somebody who's working on an adult team, I get paranoid then about the tone that comes in with people working in other underage teams, because then that divide then starts happening where everybody just starts looking after their own team. It's like, where's the tops for the under 14s? Where's the tops for the under 16s? Or under 18 girls didn't get any.
But,
And
see
then
that,
everybody...
but that's understandable. A coach in our club put it well to me. Like, he was like, you know, you have to accept when people volunteer, they're giving up something more. You know, they're actually giving up something very precious. So they're gonna be invested. They're gonna be difficult at times because they're giving up their time.
Yeah.
You know, because I would sometimes be thinking, oh, like, if you're volunteering, like, everyone just, you know, relax. We're all volunteers, but it's like you are giving up something very important. And I think that feeling that, you know, we merit something as well as anybody else. And especially if you're one team where there's money going into it, it's very hard. It's very hard not to. And I think, but I do think, and this, I've written a piece for the Currency on this weekend about we were talking about the pathways, and the plan for Irish football. And I actually feel like, when you talk about people leaving GAA clubs because of whatever is happening, like, I actually feel that one of the problems, and it wasn't the summer football as much as the other elements of it, was creating pathways everywhere in this pathways plan, the FAI. Everywhere is a pathway. You must be on the pathway. Where are you on the pathway? Get on the pathway. Where are you going? You know, where are you going in the pathway? And so kids feel they have to be on the pathway, and clubs sell themselves to kids as, we're on the pathway.
Yeah.
I actually think the FAI would have been better in a way, because they talk in the terribly written pathways plan, which I read again this week. They talk about the Irish DNA, and it'll be true to the spirit of the Irish DNA or something like this. But actually what they should have done was emphasize the local and the community. And actually you belong somewhere, and we will develop you there. We will develop you and you will learn, this is where you will learn.
I think the big mistake that soccer makes is what you've just said. They've literally got an organisation next door in the GAA that, for all we're talking about, you know, the corrosive effect of creeping professionalism, that is built on local club, and producing excellence through being local and striving at a local level. Like the Cliffords come from Fossa, you know, which is on the outskirts of Killarney, one of 4 clubs in Killarney, or, you know, you've produced basically the greatest player of all time. We're like, okay, I know there's development squads in Kerry and all that, but he's still lining out for Fossa. He didn't at the age of 12 say, I'm done, I'm going playing for
and I'm not
next
saying
club up.
Evan Ferguson should still be playing for St. Kevin's. Like, that's not the point. But there is no need for most people to be going anywhere most of the time, and yet you have this incredible culture. Like, people, like, coaches at, like, you know, blitzes and things. I heard a sort of coach, you know, on another squad running after a kid who's with his parents and putting a flyer into the car as he leaves the kind of, you know, come and have a trial. And the kid thinks, you know, here I go. Sorry, I'm Alexander Isak. You know, so long, Newcastle. You know what I mean? Like, they're knocking on my door now. I won't put in a transfer request, but, like, respect my wishes. It's time to leave.
If you're a 14-year-old kid from Longford and you want to make it in soccer, you can't do it unless you go to Sligo twice a week. You have no chance of making it, seemingly. It's extraordinary that this template that's there, this unusual template, which shows you how you can foster talent, and is there. It's right there in front of you. And you ignore it for 100 years. You just ignore it. And then you have a situation where, and I've given this example before, if I'm going around County Meath to GAA matches, I pull into these places that have dressing rooms, toilets, blah, 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 blah. If I'm going around County Meath, going to soccer matches, 50% of the places I'm going to won't have dressing rooms or toilets, and kids are changing on the side of a pitch. And this is all a product of this failure to take the game into a local sphere.
We started this podcast trying to pitch ourselves as young and hip, and we ended it by bemoaning the changing ways.
I thought you were going to say we started this podcast several days ago.
We were young and hip when it started.
Dion did say, you know, the longer the better. Didn't even get to touch on Mark Goldbridge and ask Tommy.
I even did research that. I asked my 14-year-old son what he thought of Mark Goldbridge getting the Bundesliga rights.
Give us a 40-second TikTok clip right now then. Give us all your thoughts in 40 seconds.
He said, well, not me, because I have a great attention span, but a lot of kids my age, they can't watch a football match without being distracted by something. So they can have the match and then they can have Mark Goldbridge waffling over it. If it's a boring 0-0 draw, they can. So it's, that's what it's all about.
I have no thoughts on it.
Can't beat that. That's brilliant, lads. Thank you very much. I really appreciated that. Got into a lot of things and we did it for a long period of time. So Dion Fanning, thank you very much. John Greene, thank you. And Tommy Martin. And we'll be back on Monday.